Okay, everyone. So this is a continuation of the previous video, and I actually forgot to show you one thing from the previous video. So let me reopen the file we created from the last time. You can find it here and open recent. So this is the title I gave it. So the workflow we did the last time was this one. It's loading everything for now. There you go. So what you see in this file right here, this is again the workflow of how we ended up with the clean data. But this actually doesn't create the clean data set right now. To do that, we need to save the data set through a save data widget right here. You can find it in this one, the save data widget. So the final clean data without unnecessary columns, this widget specifically right here, we will connect that to a save data widget, and it will give you options on how to save it, to add type annotations to the header or to autosave when receiving new data or whatever. You can uncheck that based on what you want. So for example, me, I don't really need the type annotations for the header. I don't really need it to tell me what the types of the features are. So I can uncheck this one, for example, and then you can either click save or save as. So let me do save as, and then give it a name, for example. So clean data, and then the file type for that one, I want it to be a CSV, so I'll choose that one, and then save this one. So save as clean data.csv. So it should do that after clicking, and you can then load that data somewhere else, for example. So in Google Sheets, you can import that data. Let me try to do that as well here. Just look for it in my other screen, and clean data.csv. So here's the one that we worked on. So if you notice, there's no missing data anymore. We deleted all of the rows that has more than 2 missing features, and we replaced all of the values that are missing with the imputed values. So for the total spent, for example, we replaced it with the average total spent, which is this value. For the categorical variables, we replaced it with the mode, or the most frequent categorical value for each feature. And we got this new feature right here that we don't need anymore, since we already replaced all the missing values with the proper ones. And you can also load this Dirty Cafe Sales CSV back into Orange as well. So for this video, that's what we're going to do, since we're going to work on changing the granularity of the data set. So this one you can continue working on from here, from this data right here, from this widget. But what you can also do is to create a new one. You can close this, for example, and to continue from where we left off, we can just import the CSV file that we created from here. and import clean data.csv. And we get these values, which is the correct one. So 7,374, 8 features, one of them is meta. So just to make sure that they are stored in the correct data type. So transaction ID is a meta variable that represents the index, item is categorical, total spent is numerical, quantity is numerical, transaction date is a date variable. Okay. So in the discussion regarding the quality of data, one thing to consider as well is how granular your data is. Depending on the specific context you're using the data set for, you might want to have a lot of details in your data set, or you might want it to be summarized in some possible way. And this cafe sales data set is perfect for that because right now it's very specific. Each sample in this data set represents a single transaction. You might be interested in looking at, for example, the total sales per day, or you might be interested in looking at the total sales per month. So to process this data set right here, you'd have to change its granularity into something that is very specific, into something that is more general, more summarized. So let's do something like that. Let's say you're interested in the total sales for a specific day. Right now, if you want to do that, you'll have to, let's say, filter it based on a specific day. So let me look at all the possible values. For example, you are interested in all of the sales in this date right here, 2023, September 8th, for example. Let's say you're interested in that date. So you can go to filter or select rows and add a condition that selects a specific date. So it actually did that for us right now because we did a selection already. But if you want to do that yourself, so you just have to select the specific transaction date, should be equal to September 8th, for example. If you close this one right here, and then end up with this. Oh, let me change this first. The signal for this one should be the entire data set instead of just the selected data. So we should end up with okay, I have to change this one since I changed the signal from the previous widget. So I need transaction date to be equals. This actually gives you a date selector since it knows that this feature right here is a date feature. So I'm interested in September 8th, 2023. See if it worked. So here are all of the features, or sorry, all of the samples which are, or the transactions for specifically on the date September 8th. And you would want to do this for every single day that exists in your data set. You would want to find the total. You would want to find the sum of all of these values, for example. So to do that, you can use several of these tools right here. You can use either of the group by widget. You can also use the pivot table widget as well. So this would allow you to aggregate specific rows into a single row, depending on how you want it to be summarized. So let's use this group by right here from this data table. Let me label this a little bit. Let's rename this as data per transaction. Actually, I think a better name would be transactions dataset. So let's say if I want to use the group by, I'll just connect that here. Make sure I'm using the entire dataset instead of just the selection. And edit the group by widget right here. So this group by widget, you just select how are you going to group all of these features by. So I want it to be grouped by transaction date. So all of the features that have the same transaction date will be grouped together. So transaction date, and then I will have to select for the aggregation methods for each of the attributes here. And in some cases, it might not make sense for you to aggregate it for that specific way. So you might want to ignore it, for example. So for the item attribute, it doesn't really make sense for me to aggregate it for that one. So I can uncheck this one right here. So we will basically ignore this specific feature in the output of the group by widget. And for total spend, this is what I'm mostly concerned with. So instead of aggregating it to a mean, or instead of summarizing it into the mean value, I want to summarize it into the sum or the total spent for that entire day. So I can unselect mean right here and then select sum. And then the payment method, let's say I want the mode for this one. So I want all of the payment method values for all of the features under the same transaction date to be summarized into their mode, or basically the mode refers to the most frequent value in the entire thing. So what that means, so let me just show you here for this specific date. So if you want to summarize all of the payment methods right here into the mode, it is going to find the most frequent value right here. And then that most frequent value is going to be outputted in the group by output. But if you're not concerned with that, you can always unselect this one if you don't care about that specific summarization. Let's say I care about that specific summarization, so I will check this one. Quantity, I want to find the total amount of items. So this quantity thing right here, I want to find the total of all of these. I want to add them all together and then summarize based on that. So I will replace this with sum. Location, I can keep that as the mode. Price per unit, I want the total as well. Or actually, I want the mean for this one. So it's up to you depending on your context. You can even add both. Let's do that. I want the sum and the mean at the same time. Transaction date, I can ignore this one since this is what I'm grouping it with. So I'm going to uncheck this one so that it's ignored. This one, I don't care about this one anymore. I'll uncheck that one. This one is just for the selection. Then this one, I'll ignore this one. So we should end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 features for this output aggregated table right here. So close this one, and then I will end up with this new table. And if you notice, the index that we're going to get is the group by column that we chose. We chose the transaction date to be our group by column. So we now have 366 instances, and each instance would refer to a unique transaction date. So all of the rows that correspond to this transaction date, January 1, 2023, are now summarized into this entire row right here. So all of the total spent values are added together into the sum. We looked for the most frequent payment method, which is digital wallet. We looked for the sum of all the quantities, which is 46. We looked for the most frequent location in all of those rows. And then we've looked for the average price per unit, and then there's that value right here. And then we also look for the total price per unit. So we end up with these values right here. And we end up with the total amount of sales for every single day right here. And it even arranged it for us from January 1, increasing date, until December 31. So by doing this group by right here, you will also actually get rid of the duplicates as well, because everything will be summarized into a single day. So everything that has the same transaction date will be collapsed together into a single row. And these are the values that you end up with. So by using this group by transformation right here, this widget, we basically change the granularity of our data set from something that is very specific, something that is very detailed, into something that is more summarized, something that gives us a bigger picture. And it depends on us if this is the granularity that we want, because by converting our data set into something that is more general, something that is less specific, into the per day data set, we lose a lot of detail. And when you're converting the granularity of your data set, you can only do it from very granular into something that is less granular. You can't do it the other way around. So if you started out with this data set right here, there's no way for you to change this into something that is more specific, because you do lose the data that you do lose the details that you had. So is a one-way thing. There is a group by transformation, and there is no transformation that reverses it. So it's always best to save this data set right here in its current form and not overwrite it with a less granular version of that data set. So let me rename this, by the way, into daily sales data set. This one, transactions on 8 September 23. We rename this into group by transactions. Okay, let's use another group by method as well. This one, not really a group by, but another aggregation method. This is known as pivot table. So for this one, not that one, transactions data set. Let me rearrange everything to make it look neater. Okay, so pivot table also does a group by transformation as well, but it also does something extra. So to select the method of grouping by, you also select the rows right here. You need to set this rows value. So if you want it to be grouped by the transaction date, you have to select transaction date for this one. And then the values for that one, let me just fix this first since it's not showing everything. I want all of the data instead of just the selected data. There you go. So for the values on this one, I want the values to be, let's say, total spent. And then for the columns, this is the interesting thing that pivot table does. I can, let's say, select item, for example. And as you see, it does a group by, but it also gives us columns based on the categories of a specific feature. So the values that we select right here, that will be the aggregation that we're going to get. We even select here the sum. So the way you would interpret this pivot table right here is that this 21 value right here is the total amount of transactions that are cake, for example. So if you look at January 1, Let's create another selection right here just to compare our data with us manual selection. Change the signal from selected data into the entire data set first. And let's change this into January 1. So these are all of the transactions that happened in January 1, and we basically filtered it only for the, what was that? The cake sales. So we filtered it for only the cake sales and then aggregated all of those cake sales together. So 12 plus 9 right here, which is 21. And if we check the pivot table right here, we do get 21 right here. And then let's say if we look at the sandwich sales, that would be 20 plus 20, 20 plus 20 plus 4, that's 44 in total. And if we look at our pivot table, for the sandwich sales, it is aggregated into 40, for example. So that's what the pivot table does. It also gives you extra columns based on categorical variables. You can change the aggregation if you don't want sum, if you want the mean. So 10.5, this is because the total is 21 and there are 2 sales for cake. 21 divided by 2, that's 10.5. For the sandwich sales, it ended up as 14.667, which is the average of 3 sandwich transactions. You can change the values right here. Let's say if you're interested in the quantity instead, and then the sum of those quantities, you end up with, there are 7 units of cake that were sold in January 1. There were 11 units of coffee that were sold in January 1, 4 units of cookies sold in January 1, and so on. You can also change the columns as well if you want to change the categorical variable that is being focused on. Let's say if you're interested in the breakdown of the location for each sales. So in January 1, 31 units were sold in store, 15 units were sold through takeaway. In January 2, 28 units were sold in store, and then 12 units were sold in takeaway. So if we verify that one here, you can change the selection right here and add another condition. Location is, let's say, in store. So we look at the quantity of all of these in-store transactions. We find the sum of this. 5 plus 5 plus 3, that's 10, 13, 18, 19, 23, 27, 31. So let's verify if we got the correct value. 28. Wait, maybe I added it incorrectly. 10, 13, 18, 19, 23, 27, 31. Am I adding it incorrectly? Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong row. So this is 31. This is what refers to the sales in January 1. So that's correct, 31 indeed. So pivot table and group by, they have different different use cases. So the pivot table allows you to break down the data set into specific categories based on a specific categorical variable, while the group by will basically create a new data set for you such that all of the features are summarized into a specific aggregation method. You can summarize it via sum, via mode, and so on. So this will, either of these methods right here will lead you to different kinds of insights. So the pivot table will allow you to break down, for example, the location transactions, the transactions depending on location, the transactions depending on item, and so on. So for example, one interesting visualization you can do, so this, what I'm doing right now is something a little bit in advanced now. So I can send this signal to a heat map, for example. Let's see if it works properly. Let me change this into a dataset first. Into this one. And then send the signal into a heat map again. Change this one into the entire data set instead of just the selected data. Something's not working right. Let me change this a little bit. We select specific columns for this one. For some reason, it's not allowing me to select. Oh, I have a feeling that I need to ignore the transaction date for this to properly work. Oh, there you go. I had to ignore it. Transaction date specifically, because the transaction date will throw off the value range right here, because internally Orange will find a way to convert the date into a numerical value, and that numerical value right there is included in the heat map. And the numerical values, when dates are converted to numerical values, the dates are very large, and it will basically throw off the range of values in the heat map. So we end up with this heat map right here, and this looks confusing, but what you're looking at, the brighter the color is, the closer it is to yellow, then that means that that value is larger. So the bright spots in this heat map right here is not as obvious because there are so many values. There are 365 rows here. The brighter the value is, the larger that is. So if you want to look at the bright spots here, the bright spot would refer to a specific item in sales. So you can be interested in specific days where the entire row is bright. For example, this one, can't select it properly, but that date, for example, is very bright. So by selecting that part in the heat map right here, and you can send that selection into a data table, you can see that this specific date right here, since I changed the date, I'm not sure what date this is anymore since I've ignored the date column. But this specific date right here is a specific date that has a lot of sales for all of the items right here. Oh, I know how far away so that the date is visible. Maybe I need to change. I need to edit domain, then change the transaction date into text, for example, or categorical even. Oh, it will ignore categorical values. I guess there's no way. Oh, there you go. I was able to show it. So this is the specific date that had a lot of sales. That's July 2, 2023. So this specific date right here, based on the bright spot that you see, it had a lot of sales. So that's how you change the granularity. You can also do the same method in Excel as well. So if you're interested in seeing the same thing done in Excel, you can select everything, for example, and you can look for pivot table right here, and it will add a new sheet. And you basically select, you're basically going to do the same thing as well. So for the rows, I want my rows to be the transaction date. I want my values to be the quantity, the amount of items, and I want it to be the sum. So these are the sum of the quantities for each specific transaction date. So all of these right here. So if you notice, September 21, this was the date that had the most sales, that had the bright spot. Not September, July 21. And if you want to have a breakdown of a specific categorical variable, you add these columns right here. So if I want a breakdown of all of the items, then you go with that. And then there you go. So this is the same pivot table. But the blank rows right here, or the blank values, are basically 0. So you end up with this table right here that you can then use. So this is a more granular version. It doesn't have a group by method the way Orange has this group by widget right here. So if you want to do it this way, you'll have to use it via pivot table. You have to manually create different pivot tables. So if you want to edit the pivot table, you can just select this one. It even has suggestions for you. So quantity for each item. But all of these suggestions, they don't really help me. Because I want a group by of per day. You can add extra columns, for example. Transaction ID. I want location. I'm end up with this one. And start takeaway. Okay, so let's try one more thing here. So this is a group by of the transactions per date. But what if we are interested in grouping this per month? So if you want this to be grouped by per month, you need to find a way to have a month column. And this is one of the things that are limitations for Orange. There's no specific formula for you to be able to transform this date column, for example, into month. There are ways to do it, but it will take you it will be a little bit of like you will have to use the select rows for that, or select columns for that, or use formulas in a specific way, or create your own Python script for it. So it's really tedious. One thing I can suggest instead of doing all of that is to use Excel as well. Combine it with Orange to basically help it with its limitations. So if I want a month column, instead of doing it in Orange, I can do it in Excel. So it's easy to do it in Excel. I can just create month, for example, and then just use the formulas for this one. Equals month of whatever transaction date is. It gives you these numeric values right here. 9 for September, 5 for May, 7 for July, and so on. You can even create one for year. And then another one for day. So we can import this or export this one into a CSV file so that we can use it in Orange. I'll download here as CSV, and this specific sheet in our file will be transformed into a CSV. and I believe it saved it in my downloads folder, so I can grab that one. I can just stay in the same file right here. I can go for CSV file import again, and then import from my downloads folder this file right here, where I now have these added columns. So I now have 11 features right here, and I'm going to call this data, for example, transactions dataset with more date information. And I can use this for my group by, so that I can group by month instead of transaction date. So group by month. Let's say I'm interested. Let me remove all of these first, so that I can just add what I need. So I want the total spent, sum. I want the most frequent payment method for the entire month. I want the average quantity for the entire month. And I also want the number of items, the total number of items for the entire month. I want the most frequent location for the entire month. I want the average price per unit for the entire month. And then I'm just going to ignore the rest of them. So close this one right here. Then let's see what it looks like. So I have 12 columns because there are 12 unique months right here. And I have this one is the total spent for January. This one is the total spent for February, March, April, May, and so on. So you can create a bar chart out of this, for example. Let's change this from the selection into the entire data set. So this is the total spent, the comparison of every month. So right now there are no labels because it will only create labels for categorical values. So if you want proper labels for that one, what you can do is you can go for edit domain, change this into the entire data set instead of just the selection, and then you need to convert the month into some form of categorical data. So for example, any value that is 1 will represent January, so I can replace this with January. This one, I can change this into February. This one, I'll replace this with March. This one, I'll replace this with April. And this one, I will replace it with May. This one, I'll replace it with June. July. August. September. October, November, and finally December. Then click apply here, and then redirect this one, place that with this signal, so that I can now select a group by right here for the categorical variable month, and now there are proper labels. So you have a comparison now. And you can see that for July, 6,561 was the total amount of total spent for the entire month. So these are basically your sales for the entire month. You can use your mouse wheel to zoom in and out. I kind of ruined it. Okay, you can reset it using this one. By the way, you can also use this edit domain as well to rearrange the way your categorical variables are sorted. So if I use these buttons right here to move this one, this will basically reorder the way this categorical variable is sorted. So it will change the ordering in the bar chart. You wouldn't want to do that. The original ordering was correct. There you go. You can also use it to change the names of the variables. So total spent sum, you can replace this with monthly sales, for example. I can replace this with average quantity per transaction. And then you can replace this one with most frequent payment method for the month. And this would be reflected in a data table, for example. So we now have the new names: monthly sales, most frequent, etc. And as always, if you want to save these datasets that we've created, let's rename this. You can always connect this one into a save data widget and then choose a name to save it for example. Save as monthly sales so that you can reuse this data somewhere else. So that's basically it for editing the granularity of your dataset. So as always, it depends on the context on what kind of insights you're looking for. If you're looking for more general insights, then you would want a dataset that is less granular. But if you want to look at the details, then you would want the more detailed or the more granular version of that dataset. It's really up to the application that you're looking for. By the way, if you are interested in looking at how to use these widgets, if you're confused with a specific widget, for example, let's say for the group by, if you want to know how to use the group by, you can use this show help button right here. And it doesn't have documentation, but I believe some of them do. Okay, if they do have documentations, it will lead you to instructions on how to use it here. And you can even check the other widgets right here on how to use them. And so on. Okay, so that's basically it for this one. Thanks, everyone.